Hello again and welcome to the Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now today guys, I want to do an after action report, a message from the front lines, because I was fortunate enough last week to be able to play a couple of games of Warhammer. The weather just about held up, had to wear a coat during one of the games, it was a bit chilly, but I was able to get a couple of games in with the Mordian 50th Rifles, and let me tell you, first things first, it was so good to be rolling the dice again, rolling the bones again, because it's all well and good doing the theory hammer. I know that the channel content has been a bit iffy over the last 6 months. I mean, I've been pumping it out consistently, but it's all been from a theory hammer point of view. We've covered some crazy topics like vanquishers and how we can make those viable. But hopefully now, with the easing of the UK lockdown, fingers crossed we're able to stick to that roadmap. I will be able to get lots of games in. Now the plan is, I've actually got a lot of events coming up, so I want to get as many games as possible, and I want to do some after action reports. Even if I don't show you the battle report every single time, I want to do an after action report from pretty much every single game that I have going forward, because it will be much more effective than theory hammer. I'll take some photographs and whatnot for the next games. Anyway, what I want to do today guys is go through the 2 games that I played, go through the lists that I used, the list that I faced, and then some lessons learned. So the first thing to say is that I was using my pure infantry guard list, and in both games I used pretty much the same list. There's a bit of variation on equipment used, but the core of the list was 18 infantry squads in 3 battalions. That was, each infantry squad had a heavy weapon and a special weapon, the majority of which, well, we'll get into that later. I also had 3 squads of veterans maxed out with plasma, and I had 2 heavy weapon squads with, well, different weapons in each game, and I also had 3 company commanders, 3 platoon commanders, and 3 Lord Commissars. Now, in the first game I faced, my list was, well, in the first game I faced against Ad Mech, and my opponent had a strong Ad Mech list. It was semi-competitive. It wasn't one that you would expect to, take LVO or anything like that, but it was a strong list that was piloted by a very, experienced Ad Mech player. And yeah, it had some good bones behind it. So his list was, it looks like an eclectic mix on paper, and then when it actually starts rolling, you realise there is method in the madness. So it was 1 Scorpius Destroyer, 1 Dune Crawler, the crab tanks, 1 of the Archaeotech Copters, the Ornithopter things, the Dakar 1 with the las cannons and the Fossil Blasters and the Stubbers. It was a unit of 4 Dakar bots. That's the big 1980s space ones. I believe they're the Castellan bots, all with the Fossil Blasters. It was a unit of 3 of the Plasma Combat Servitors, and then a whole load of Skitarii. This was all in the Mars Forge world with Call, and he also had another Tech Priest Dominer, so he could have 2 bubbles of rerolls, and he also had an Inquisitor, and the Inquisitor was there to give him access to some psychic secondaries. I was a bit curious. Again, looks like an eclectic mix, actually was really powerful. Now, in terms of what happened in the game, it was hammer and anvil, and it was 6 objectives, so it was long firing lanes. We did have a good terrain heavy board, which definitely helped, but it became very apparent very quickly that my opponent's shooting was significantly better than mine. This will be a theme that you'll notice in both games. Now, essentially, I won't go through the exact turn-by-turn breakdown. What happened was, on the first turn, my opponent got first turn and did some decent long-range firepower. And this is when my opponent's eclectic mix started showing through. And this was very prevalent for turns 1 and 2. Because he had such a mix of units, he was able to get access to a lot of different stratagems. I believe there's a stratagem that gives the plane strafing run, or some sort of +1 to hit. And then there was a stratagem for the Scorpius, and stratagems here, stratagems there. Basically, my opponent was able to dump about 5 CP into his list a turn, and what that CP allowed my opponent to do was to get army-wide bonuses to shooting, things like +1 to hit, which meant that a lot of my opponent's army was hitting on 3s with 4 rerolls with Call, or 2s with reroll 1s thanks to the Tech Priest Dominus. Really strong stuff. He also, thanks to it being Mars, he was permanently in Shroud's arm, which actually was a big deal. Having those Skitarii basically rocking around with power armor against my army, which really relies on drowning people in las bolts, was a big deal. So turn 1, my opponent does a decent amount of firepower. My turn 1, I struggle to connect through, not just because it was long boards. I wasn't in my 18-inch rapid fire with as many hits as I would have wanted to be. So essentially that meant that my return firepower was relatively weak. I think I killed a handful of Skitarii. In my opponent's turn 2, he went into beast mode with those 1980 space robots, cleared out a flank. I think he went 4 robots for 4 squads. It was a blistering display of firepower. Basically, but what happened with the game was I was able to push forward, turn after turn, throwing bodies on. The veterans came in. The veterans came in and deleted his robots. If they hadn't done that, it would have been really bad. But by the end of the game, I had taken, I kid you not, 90% casualties. I had about 20 to 30 infantry left, including characters. Essentially, out of 240 infantry, I had about, I would say, about 24 left. And I definitely took about 90% casualties, but managed to win on points. I had been able to deny my opponent primary objectives by slingshotting guardsmen at the board using move, which meant my opponent scored relatively weakly on primary. Only got about 25 or 30 primary points, and I'd also been able to deny my opponent his secondaries because, yes, he did max out in the ranks, of course, but his other secondaries he struggled to achieve because he was forced to be a relatively static gunliney army because he had so many bodies coming towards him. He had to focus on his firepower rather than his manoeuvrability. I was able to deny my opponent's scramblers for a lot of the game, and I also was able to deny my opponent's psychic ritual, which he tried to use get his inquisitor with because I had no psychic to stop it. But the way I stop psychic powers, guys, is with melter guns. I got a melter shot on his inquisitor, got a couple of squads in there, 1 miss, 1 hit, got that wound, and then did 5 wounds on the melter gun, and that's how you stop a psyker with a melter gun. So lessons learned for the first game. Oh, should have said the reason why my the first list was a bit weak on my end. It was already, you know, pure infantry, which is strong, but you know it's strong through pure bodies. But in terms of firepower, it can be a bit weak, and that's what I noticed. You see. My first game, I hadn't really thought about the list I was putting together. I just used the units as I had built them, and that meant that I had a lot of flamers and grenade launchers in my infantry squads, which are not what I want. I actually left all those extra plasma guns and metal guns that I built for the army on the shelf. So I didn't realise that until you know, bit rusty there, but I didn't realise that until afterwards, and I was like, oh well, this is going to be difficult, and boy, it was difficult. In fact, without the plasma veterans, I think I would have been tabled. It's as simple as that. So I definitely, found that I needed the plasma, and yeah, so I took that into my second game. So the second game that I played was against Blood Angels, another semi-competitive list, and I mean semi-competitive in its purest form. We're talking a strong list with good bones, piloted by an experienced player, but not one that you would necessarily expect to see top tables, but one that you know that player can take to a tournament and can comfortably in the top half, top 33%. So my list was basically the same, except for I had 2 squads of mortars this time rather than a mortar squad and an autocannon squad. Should have said that for the last game, but the autocannons were just taken out turn 1. Also, this time I remembered my melter and I remembered my plasma, so all my squads had the appropriate melter and plasma. Now, for those of you wondering why I didn't have 3 heavy weapon squads, there's still a few fluff upgrades in this army, not by choice, just by trying to play WYSIWYG. But the final version of the list would have 3 squads of mortars. Now, my opponent's list was 15 Vanguard Vets. I believe he combat squadded 1 squad of 10 down 2 squads of 5, but 15 Vanguard Veterans, 15 Tactical Marines, all of those in Rhinos. I know, Rhinos, weird, right? You wouldn't think it would be worth it, but actually it was very much worth it because it meant that my opponent was able to hide his units and also get an extra 3 inches worth of movement out of them turn 1 by disembarking out of the Rhino, and it just meant that his units were protected, and it meant that he wasn't having to foot slog it across the board. which was very effective for him. Meant he could say, you know, it worked actually really well. And I was surprised at how effective the rhinos were. And then he also had 15 Death Company, 7 Sanguinary Guard, Terminator Captain, Thunderhammer Captain, Gabriel Seth, and a Sanguinary Ancient. I believe that covers most of it. Now, the reason my opponent went for Tactical Marines over Intercessors is because he was able to put a Plasma Gun in each Tactical Marine squad just for a little bit of tactical flexibility. That's what we like from our Tactical Marines. And also, my opponent was like, these guys are going to set objectives. I don't need the extra attacks from the Intercessors. I'd rather save points, and those points saved, I'd rather grab myself a Plasma Gun, which I'll actually, you know, find more useful. It was an interesting idea. Yeah, definitely not a bad idea. I mean, anyway, so then the Vanguard Veterans and whatnot. So what happened in that game was I actually managed to get first turn, but my opponent had used good terrain. Again, we had a really nice terrain-heavy board, and because of this, I was only able to bring to bear some of my long-range firepower, and my weak turn 1 shooting, thanks to dense terrain, meant that I only did about 7 wounds to a rhino. So in the first game, my turn 1, I only killed 5 Scutari. In my second game, I did 7 wounds to a rhino. You're noticing a theme here. Turn 1 firepower from this list is lacking. I definitely need to think about that. Now, unfortunately, with the second game, we only managed to play 2 full turns, but it was very much. But then we had, because of time constraints, we weren't. You know, we had to pack up a little early. But it very much was going the same way as the first game. I was dominating on primary. I was denying my opponent's secondaries. I was very much ahead in terms of points. By the end of turn 2, I believe my opponent had scored a bit, because you don't score primary turn 1, so he'd only got, I think, 5 or 10 points. Yeah, I denied my opponent some points for his primary, and my opponent actually ended up scoring 5 points for primary objectives in his first turn, whereas I scored his second turn, whereas I scored 15 points for mine. So yeah, I was doing well on the primary points, but the problem was that I was losing guardsmen quickly. My opponent had, I dealt with half my opponent's Vanguard Vets and Death Company, but he had another wave of Vanguard Vets coming in. He had his Sanguinary Guard coming in. I'd lost a squad of Veterans, but I did have another one in reserve. It was looking dicey, so we called that one a draw. So because there was a very realistic chance that my Blood Angels opponent could have clawed it back in those last couple of turns. He definitely could have clawed it back just by dominating the field of battle and corralling me into my deployment zone and not letting me get many more engage points. So, lessons learned from both games. Number 1, my first turn firepower was weak. Even with putting a heavy weapon squad in every single infantry squad, my first turn firepower was very, very lackluster. I need to think about how I'm going to address that. Lesson number 2 is my army can definitely win on points. In the first game, I won 81 points to 68 points, and in the second game, by the end of turn 2, I think I was already on like 40 points. So it was looking, you know, strong, 30 or 40 points, 30 points plus painting score, 40 points. So it was looking strong. But again, it was very much, I was dying in droves. Third, that's fine. That's the infantry guard way. I think perhaps because I've not been able to play pure infantry guard because of the Great Mordian Restoration project and not wanting to use the army until it's painted properly, and also because of lockdown, I am a little rusty, and it was a little harrowing taking those casualties. I just need to get back into the flow. I just need to be used to taking that many casualties. But yeah, so the army did work as intended, but it took a serious beating in both cases. The other thing I wanted to say is, without my veterans, this list would have been tabled even if it had taken more bodies. So I was thinking of running 2 versions of this list. The second version being no veterans but loads of conscripts, and the end result would have been I would have had 270 bodies versus the 240 bodies I had in this list. Thank God I didn't go that way. 270 bodies would not have helped me in either of these games. Having the veterans was key. What this has really put me on to, guys, and the reason why I've got these two squads in front of me today, is it's really started getting me thinking about scions. I think if you're going down the Astra Militarum, if you're going down the Imperial Guard, the classic IG route, Pure Infantry Guard definitely can win your games. Definitely, no doubt about that. However, I think that scions really do have a competitive edge. The fact that my ballistic skill 3+ special weapon guys were really pulling their weight in both games really stood out to me. Really stood out to me. My elite units did significantly better than all of my horde units combined. I mean, to give an example, guys, I had 40 guardsmen with first rank fire, second rank fire unload into a squad of Vanguard veterans, and they just about killed them. Just about. I had one squad of veterans come in from a flank, and thanks to their plasma, they wiped out a squad of Vanguard veterans without breaking a sweat. You know, Vanguard veterans my veterans with spent 1 CP for experience eye on them to make sure that my opponent didn't get a save. AP-4 plasma, and yeah, 7 shots, plasma pistol, 6 plasma guns, rerolling 1s, got the hits, got the wounds, got 5 hits, 5 wounds straight through, killed those Vanguard veterans, and that was done by a 100-point unit versus 280 points of guardsmen trying to achieve the same thing. So yes, ballistical 3+ plasma toting units, I think they definitely could be a way for the guard to go. I'm going to be doing some serious deep dives, some serious games with scions. I think they might be, I think they've got some bones there, guys. Definitely got some competitive edge. When I was thinking over these games afterwards and saying, what if I'd taken a scion list? What if I turned up with 70 or 80 scions backed up by Torx primes, and maybe even a Valkyrie of Dead? Would I have done any? My turn 1 firepower probably would have been pretty similar, but my turn 2 firepower, my turn 3, my turn 4, I think I would have just had wave after wave of specialists with hotshot volley guns, with plasma guns. Definitely something for me to think about. Anyway, we're going to end that video there, guys. So this is the after action report. Let me know what you think about it. Definitely going to be touching on these games and what I've learned from them in the rest of the videos throughout this week, especially with some of those scion ones. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoy this video, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.